I'm Brittany, this is Shen Wei, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we continue our journey through Volume 3 of Guardian. We will be finishing Guardian this week. There were no streams last week because first my house tried to fall apart in the plumbing, and then I got sick. So last week, some stuff was going on, but this week I'm feeling much better. I might still be a little bit congested, but on the whole, much, much better than how I was feeling just a few days ago. We usually read for a couple of hours. This week, for all the streams, however, we will be reading a little bit longer, just to make sure that we can get through the volume. So we will be going into about 5:30 instead of about 5. We're still going to take a break about halfway through, and if for whatever reason my voice really starts to feel like raw towards the end, there might be a little bit of an extra break for me to make sure that like the tea is really hot or something like that. But considering how my throat is feeling at the moment, we should be fine. We should be good. Somebody knock on something, but we should be okay. So, we are on page 111 for chapter 10. And the stream is looking in perfectly good health at the moment, so we should be good. But there have been a couple of hiccups in recent streams, so as per usual, if all of a sudden I freeze, just throw some stop signs into the chat and I'll see it and I'll figure out what the heck is going on. So... When Ghostface's black mist swallowed Jalan Lan up, it had felt like having a sack yanked down over his head. Once he finally managed to get free of it, he realized he had somehow teleported and had no idea where he was. Let me lift the microphone up here for maximum dramatic effect. If nothing else, it was clear that he was no longer beneath the Wangchuan River. The world around him was nothing but white. Coiling his whip, he started walking, trying to find his way. Then, as he squinted against the blinding whiteness, he saw a lonely figure walking ahead in the far distance. Zhao Yunlan was tall and had long legs, so he quickly caught up. The distant silhouette turned out to belong to a short old man whose height barely reached Zhao Yunlan's chest. His spine was curved like a cooked shrimp, and he had a basket on his head, the kind often used by people from the Yunnan Guizhou? I believe so. The Yunnan Guizhou Plateau. It's plateau that I get stuck on. Thanks so much. Taking a peek inside, Zhao Yunlan saw that it was empty, and yet the old man moved as if carrying hundreds of kilograms, too weighed down to even lift his head. He walked onward with his face toward the ground and his back facing the sky. Zhao Yunlan reached out and put a hand under the basket to help support it. "Is it that heavy?" he murmured. Finally, the old man stopped and wiped his dripping forehead. He looked up, revealing a tanned, aged face, not unlike that of the old man holding water in Lo Zhongli's famous oil painting, Father. He gave Zhao Yunlan a weary smile. "Come," he said. "Follow me." "Where are we going?" Zhao Yunlan asked. "Where is this? Who are you?" The old man didn't answer. He dropped his gaze back down and struggled forward like a decrepit ox pulling a plow. The empty basket dug into his shoulders. Sharp old collarbones peeked out below his collar. "Are you the one who brought me here?" Zhao Yunlan sighed. "Why? I finally managed to catch my wife, and you interrupted and ruined it before I got a single word out." With a small smile, the old man listened to his griping, but didn't explain or respond. Zhao Yunlan wasn't discouraged. "What are you carrying in the basket?" There was still no reply. The old man just continued at his own pace, singing under his breath. "Guard the souls..." Oh, so this is what he's singing. They usually do song lyrics a little bit differently, but this being what he's singing. "Guard the souls of the living, bring peace to the hearts of the dead, atone for crimes done in life, and complete the unfinished cycle." His voice droned on, spitting out the words as though he were chanting, repeating the phrase again and again. His tone was reminiscent of those people in the past who'd chant, "This family is awarding 120 silver taels," while tossing spirit money during funeral processions. Jiao Lan was getting more suspicious by the moment. The whip in his hand transformed into the soul guarding order, red words on black paper. He rolled it up like a cigarette and put it in his mouth, holding it there as he patiently followed the old man. But they'd been walking for such a long time now, and there was still no end in sight. He had the sudden feeling that he was walking on a road to heaven. That rang a bell. Path to heaven. Wasn't Buzhou the path to heaven? Hadn't Buzhou Mountain already fallen? Just as he had that thought, a sigh came from somewhere in the void. Something crystallized in Jiao Lan's mind. Staring at the old man, he blurted, "Are you Shenong?" Once again, the old man's footsteps stopped. Slowly, he turned back and looked at Jiao Lan, not saying a word. Every muscle in Jiao Lan's body tensed. Ever since he'd confirmed that the memories he'd seen within the great divine tree were fake, a suspicion had lurked in his mind. It wasn't as if just anyone could even go to the peak of Kunlun Mountain, never mind tamper with the great divine tree itself. He could count the number of people who'd be capable of it with one hand. Since then, he'd pored over those memories countless times. The parts that had to do with his left soul fire were particularly unclear, and the parts that related to the fall of Buzhou Mountain were especially clunky and forced. So who was lying to him? Shenong seemed like the most obvious candidate. What Jiao Lan had seen inside the tree had shown Shenong consistently appearing at exactly the right time, coolly overseeing events at a distance from start to finish. At first glance, Shenong's righteousness seemed unquestionable, but after reviewing it carefully, it seemed clear to Jiao Lan that something wasn't right. Those memories had told a complete story. If any one person in that story hadn't played their part, things would have ended differently. That meant all their actions were directly connected to sequences of events that could be explained. Any one person, except Shenong. If Shenong hadn't been part of the story, it still would have started and ended the same way. Nothing would have changed. Later, Jiao Lan had seen Shenong's stone mortar possessing his dad, and when Jiao Lan heard Ghostface say that Shenong had borrowed his soul fire, it had seemed as though he'd unintentionally let something slip. Those things seemed to confirm Jiao Lan's suspicions, but most of all, he now kept coming back to Nua's vague, confusing words in the great sealing rock. Shenong was wrong. Jiao Lan clenched his fist. So was it you who tampered with the great divine tree or not? The old man still said nothing, but worry entered his expression. For an instant, Jiao Lan felt like he heard the wind blowing on Buzhou. Without warning, the snowy white world shattered, emitting a piercing bright light. I believe that's a typo. I'm pretty sure they mean emitting and not admitting. Jiao Lan quickly shielded his eyes. Then, vision blurred by tears, he realized that he had somehow arrived in the mortal realm. He assessed his surroundings, which immediately felt both familiar and not. It took him a few minutes to recognize where he was. It was the ice cream shop on the corner that tipped him off. Jiao Lan's eyes went wide. He was near his childhood home. That old ice cream shop had closed ages ago, and the spot had been a small hot pot restaurant for 5 or 6 years now. At first, he was completely at a loss. He bought a bowl of shaved ice with the meager change he had on him and ate it, staring at the prominent 2002 on the calendar on the shop wall. He stuck out like a sore thumb among a group of middle school girls, the shaved ice crunching between his teeth. He looked exactly like someone the mafia had sent to collect protection fees in exchange for not smashing the store. Somehow, he had returned to the year 2002. The whole thing was like being in a dream, or like watching some shoddy movie that abruptly changed scenes. One minute the protagonist was up in the sky, the next they were underground, and then finally they managed to get back to the mortal realm, only to be transported 11 years into the past. Jiao Lan suddenly glimpsed something in his peripheral vision. Through the shop window, he saw a familiar car driving out of the neighborhood. The old car that had held countless childhood memories. The car that his father had heartlessly replaced. Dropping his half-eaten shaved ice on the table, Jiao Lan bolted out of the shop with the speed of someone catching their spouse with their secret lover. He flagged down a taxi, digging out his tattered work ID and brandishing the police badge in front of the driver's eyes. "I need you to follow that car. Stay close." The driver had never imagined he'd have the chance to chauffeur a 007. Thrilled by this once-in-a-lifetime chance, he stopped on the gas. The car shot forward like a racehorse, nearly sending Jalan Lan sprawling in the passenger seat. Ahead of them, his father drove to Antique Street, with its alley full of shops where cars weren't permitted. From 100 meters away, Jalan Lan watched as his father parked on the roadside and went into the alley, face hidden by the kind of large sunglasses celebrities wore to avoid paparazzi. "Sir, stop here! Here!" Jalan Lan's eyes were glued to his father's silhouette. He fumbled for his wallet, only for the driver to righteously refuse to let him pay. "Please, don't waste any more of my time," Jalan Lan exclaimed. "Take this, I'm about to lose him." The driver only saluted and gave him a vigorous handshake. In a resonant voice that clearly wasn't about to take no for an answer, he said, "Comrade, go. I won't take your money. I want to serve the people." Jalan Lan lost another moment to speechlessness, then decided not to push harder to be polite. He decisively flung himself out of the car. 11 years ago, Antique Street had been far less regulated. The narrow alleyway held tons of roadside stalls, hawking anything from jewelry and jade to ancient paintings and calligraphy. Anything you could imagine could be found there, authentic or fake. Either way, the place bustled with activity. Hiding his tracks, Jalan Lan dry swallowed a yellow paper talisman. It was one of the ones he'd drawn back when he was blind. He'd sold all the good ones, so the only ones he still had on him were defective. Up ahead, Shenong's mortar was clearly the one piloting his father's body. Jalan Lan kept his distance, afraid that the inferior talisman wouldn't be able to hide him completely. As a result, he turned a corner just to find that he'd already lost him. Jalan Lan peeked cautiously into every shop but didn't see his quarry anywhere. Then his gaze landed on the pagoda tree that was linked to the netherworld. Having no other choice, Jalan Lan took a deep breath and headed down the Huangquan Road for the second time that day, itching to kick that stupid bull spirit a new asshole. Walking on the Huangquan Road wasn't a pleasant experience for a living being. Even a hoodlum like Jalan Lan, who'd venture outside without socks in the dead of winter, really couldn't endure the bone-piercing, gloomy cold. His dad waited on the road for some time, rubbing his hands idly. His brows drew tighter and tighter together. It seemed as though he was waiting for someone. Jalan Lan didn't dare just appear out of nowhere, but the long, thin path of the Huangquan Road offered nothing to hide behind. His only option was to curl in on himself and hide within the pagoda tree, which left him feeling stuck between the yin and yang realms. He was just hitting the point where half of his body was about to go numb when a familiar figure approached along the road from the other direction. It was someone who drew every eye, if only because not a single ghost dared linger wherever he passed. Even the reapers, who were doing their utmost to feign calm, couldn't help lowering their heads and giving him wide berth. From a distance, the effect was almost like the Red Sea parting before Moses. With just one look, Jalan Lan immediately felt deeply awkward, as anyone would in his shoes, realizing that their wife had privately met up with their dad 11 years ago. Shen Wei was wearing the soul executing emissary's long cloak, face fully concealed. He stopped 5 paces away from Jalan Lan's father and said not a word. The chill clinging to him was even more piercing than the desolate Huangquan. Jalan Lan's dad stopped pacing and rubbed his hands. It was as though the two men were competing to see who could hold their silence longer. The atmosphere was suffocating as they stared each other down. Finally, it was Jalan Lan's father who cracked. The evening newspaper that Yunlan brought home had my lord's scent on it. Shen Wei snorted with cold laughter. It was so unlike anything Zhao Yunlan had ever heard from him that he could almost suspect that the black-cloaked man wasn't Shen Wei at all, but the passive-aggressive ghost face. That would be concerning. Zhao Yunlan's father's body might have been possessed by an impressive soul, but it was still mortal flesh. After only a short time on the Huangquan Road, his lips had already started to turn purple from the cold. At a close glance, he even seemed to be shivering slightly, but there was no trace of weakness in his tone. "Don't forget what you promised my master when you insisted on sending Kunlun Jun's soul into the reincarnation cycle." "Oh," Shen Wei finally spoke. "I merely glimpsed him from afar. When he passed by, I avoided him. Even if you have no faith in my character and fear that I'll go back on my word, do you not believe in the sage Shenong's golden contract?" His voice now sounded as courteous and mild as usual, but Zhao Yunlan was used to detecting the subtleties in other people's tones. Those few words held unmistakable disrespect and mockery. Then what's happening with the Great Seal? Zhao Yunlan's father demanded. Why would the Great Hotu Seal come loose? The original Great Fuchsia seal, lasted only a few hundred years before the pillars of the sky fell and broke it, after which it was repaired. Ever since Nua descended, the Great Hotu seal has remained for thousands of years. Truthfully, it's held up longer than expected, Shen Wei said icily. Even dripping water can wear through rock eventually. The Great Seal is weakening because its time has come to an end. Preventing that is beyond anyone's power, including mine. The Great Hotu Seal was created with Nua's life and is filled with Kunlun Jun's care and hard work. Of course, I wasn't implying you'd do something to it that you shouldn't, but what if it were to truly collapse? What will you do then? Yes, Shen Wei replied lightly. What do I plan on doing? I'm an utter fool, but I finally understand what the ancient sages used to say. If one doesn't die, doesn't perish, then one cannot become a god. But when I stop and think about it, I was never a god respected and worshipped by all. Don't you even entertain the notion that on the day the Great Seal collapses, you'll no longer be bound by Shenong's contract? If my son... The sentence broke off unnaturally, like speakers malfunctioning halfway through a movie. Zhao Yunlan's father opened and closed his mouth, but there was no sound. Even with Shen Wei's face hidden by black mist, Zhao Yunlan could feel that he was smiling. Leisurely, Shen Wei said, Your son. You've really gotten into your role, haven't you? Do you think your son would accept you as his father if he knew you gave up being a carefree immortal to descend to the mortal realm and possess a human who just happened to be his father? Do you suppose he'd see you as friend or foe? There was a gurgling in the silenced man's throat. He clutched at his own neck, eyes bulging, but he couldn't make a sound. Entirely unbothered, Shen Wei watched for a bit. Finally, he gave a light laugh and waved. It was as if Zhao Yunlan's dad had been punched. He stumbled back a couple of steps, barely managing to stay upright. You... Shen Wei gathered up his long sleeves. With a slight nod, he said, Please watch your words. Some things are better left unspoken, even if it's something everyone knows, don't you think? The ancient sage Shenong was well respected. I, too, respect him greatly, of course. But respect only goes so far. If he still walked this earth, he and I would always be in opposition. We would never come to peace under the same sky. I never took the three sovereigns themselves seriously, much less Shenong's treasured mortar. You haven't yet cultivated to Shenong's level of power, have you? As the man stood trembling from head to toe, Shen Wei mildly continued, I'd rather not do anything crass. I'm willing to stand here and speak calmly with you, with the hope that you can learn to conduct yourself properly from now on. Don't overreach or meddle in too much. If there's nothing else, I won't be sending you off. Without another glance, Shen Wei turned and walked into the Huangquan River, heading deeper into the Huangquan. Zhao Yunlan was all but paralyzed with shock. Why had Shen Wei and Shenong refused to come to an accord under the same sky? No wonder Shenong's medicine mortar had fled without a word of explanation that day. He'd been too afraid to speak in Shen Wei's presence. How could Zhao Yunlan's delicate, scholarly, easily bullied lover also turn out to be a terrorist who'd put a gag order on Zhao Yunlan's fake dad? And also, what was Shenong's golden contract? If Shenong had been the one to borrow Zhao Yunlan's left soul fire, if the past that Zhao Yunlan had seen in the Great Sealing Rock was true, then how had his soul fire come to an end with the Gui? If the memories in the Great Divine Tree were really Shenong's invention, what was he trying to hide? Zhao Yunlan's dad was approaching, so Zhao Yunlan hastily scrambled up the tree and hid between the lush leaves and branches. He only peered out once the man had disappeared into the distance. He then descended back down the Huangquan, thinking hard as he stared in the direction Shen Wei had gone. Somehow he still doubted that this was real. He was starting to get used to being lied to. At the rate things were going, he was going to become paranoid and suspect that everything was a lie. A light bulb suddenly went off in Zhao Yunlan's head. Remembering that record of ancient secrets was rolled up in his breast pocket, he quickly took it and opened it, only to find the book blank. Its cover and pages were all empty. Not a single word of text remained. Zhao Yunlan's gaze dropped. 11 years ago, 2002, just so happened to be the legendary Renwu year he'd heard so much about. If what he'd just seen was real, then what if he headed to the general store at the end of Ghost City and bought Record of Ancient Secrets? Would that be the copy that would appear at 4 Bright Avenue in 11 years? That's the end of the chapter, by the way. We are on page 123 for chapter 11. That damn book. What if he didn't go buy it? What if he just dumped this roll of blank pages into the waters of the Wangchuan? Jalan Lan acted on the thought the moment it entered his mind, flinging the blank paper into the Wangchuan River. It landed with a splash and slowly began to sink. He stood there waiting for a good long while, but no one came to find him for littering. If everything he had experienced here was what had really happened in the past, then if he didn't go buy Record of Ancient Secrets, the Special Investigations Department wouldn't have a copy of it in 11 years' time. He wouldn't be able to learn the secrets that had enabled him to deduce what had happened after Nuwa created humans and became Hotu. It was possible that, just to be safe, he wouldn't have even gone up Kunlun Mountain, in which case the merit brush could have ended up anywhere. He wouldn't have seen what he'd seen inside the Great Divine Tree, and none of what came after would have happened. As a result, he might not have plunged into the Huangquan, and even if he did happen to make his way here somehow, he wouldn't know that Shenong's mortar was occupying his father's body. In that case, he might just go home and visit his mother, not caring in the slightest why his father had stepped out. Of course, that would mean he wouldn't flag a taxi to follow his dad. Taken all together, it would mean he wouldn't be here now on the Huangquan Road, pondering the stupid question of whether or not he should go buy that book, because that book wouldn't even exist. According to the famous grandfather paradox, this would be impossible, unless he'd entered a parallel universe, as good old Einstein had said. In other words, if he made a different choice in disturbed time in history, he'd find himself in a completely different parallel world. Unless... Stopping his pacing, Jalan Lan closed his eyes. The only thing he could hear was the murmuring of the Wangchuan. The fathomless netherworld seemed as silent as an abyss. He found himself suddenly thinking of what he'd heard in the Great Hotu Seal, words that had come from Kunlun Jun's own mouth. What we call fate isn't some divine constraint. It's a single moment when you're confronted with tens of thousands of possibilities. In that instant, you can ascend to the heavens or descend into the earth, but in the end, there's only one path you'll inevitably choose. That sentiment has stayed with me, by the way. It has legitimately reframed the way that I think about destiny. Zhao Yanlan's breathing gradually slowed. He knew perfectly well where his thoughts were trying to go. He desperately wanted to know if Shen Wei and the mortar possessing his father's body had truly met behind his back 11 years ago, if the conversation he'd overheard between them had really happened, if there truly was a contract between Shen Wei and Shenong that he didn't know about, and if there was another side to Shen Wei, one completely different from his righteous, gentlemanly appearance. And on top of all that, did Shen Wei really not know that the netherworld had been using him all this time? If he knew, how could he not care? Or did he have something else planned? Half a minute later, Jalan Lan slipped a leaf of illusion into his mouth to block his own living scent and strode off toward Ghost City. The little owner of the general store still looked only 7 or 8 years old, and she didn't seem at all surprised to see him. Even when Jalan Lan asked specifically for Record of Ancient Secrets, she merely quoted the price in spirit money before bringing out the giant account book and asking him to write down his name. When he obliged, there was a white flash, and the word Guardian appeared before his name, along with the date. This time, no one in Ghost City noticed that one of the living was walking among them. Jalan Lan escaped successfully and headed straight home with his new acquisition. As stealthily as possible, he flipped over the fence and crawled through the window into his own bedroom. The Jalan Lan and Da Qing of 11 years ago weren't there. There was only a computer and a pile of random university English final study guides on the desk. On one page, someone had commented dog shit in a distinctive chicken scratch scrawl. Jalan Lan couldn't help touching a light finger to those inelegant words, smiling in spite of himself. It felt like looking in a mirror and seeing his own reflection from back when he was still in his edgy teenage phase. He turned away and lifted the baseboard of his bed, revealing the space where he'd once hidden all sorts of books about folk legends, myths, and the occult, along with cinnabar, yellow paper, and other tools. To keep this new addition to his collection from standing out, he treated it the same way all the other books had been. He grabbed a stack of old wall calendars from the drawer, tore out a page from the middle, and deftly wrapped the cover of Record of Ancient Secrets. On this new snow-white cover, he began writing in small print, Nua created humans, repaired the sky. He intended to write Nua created humans, repaired the sky, and then turned into Hotu. Fusha used the yin and yang bagua to create the Great Seal. Shenong sacrificed his godly status, turned into a human, and tasted every herbal medicine. Gongong and the divine dragon struck down Buzhou in anger. A rough summary of everything in the book that would be useful to him in the future. But he'd only written a few words when there was a noise from the hallway. Quickly dropping the book, Zhao Yunlin closed the baseboard compartment, clumsy enough in his hurry that he nearly caught his hand in it. The person in the hallway had sharp ears. There was a knock, and then his mother's voice, as it had sounded 11 years ago, called out to him. "Little asshole, you home? What are you doing, making so much noise?" Zhao Yunlin's throat bobbed, but he didn't dare answer. The next knock was harder. "Zhao Yunlin?" All Zhao Yunlin could do was pitch his voice higher and let out his best attempt at a meow. "The cat?" his mother muttered. "But it only comes home after dark. Why is it back so early today? Is it pregnant? I said ages ago that we should have gotten it spayed." Zhao Yunlin kept his mouth shut, relieved to have fooled his mom. He exhaled and was about to finish writing on the book when he heard a car outside. He carefully pulled the curtain aside and glanced out to find that his dual-personality father was back. He was a tough nut, harder to fool than his mother. Making a split-second decision, Zhao Yunlin stuffed the book into his messy library of 11 years ago and nimbly jumped out the window. He landed silently on the grass and looped around in the opposite direction from the approaching car. He'd successfully broken into and escaped from his own house. From there, he cut through the residential compound and reached the main road, only to be at a loss for where to go next. Then the ground shook violently beneath him. An earthquake. But no, everyone he could see looked perfectly calm, and the buildings all sat in one place, steady as fortresses. Not a single speck of debris fell. As Zhao Yunlin concluded that it was only his world that was spinning, his surroundings melted away, and the ground vanished beneath his feet. He looked up again and found himself on that empty white path, standing before the old man he suspected of being Shenong. Grabbing the old man's collar, Zhao Yunlin demanded, "Tell me what's—" The old man finally spoke, cutting him off. In a strange accent, he said, "Do you know what death is?" Zhao Yunlin's brows knit tightly together. Seconds passed as he met the old man's gaze, and then he tentatively offered a textbook answer. "Death is the cessation of a body's vital signs?" "Then what are the ethereal and corporeal souls?" rasped the old man. "What are the 6 paths of reincarnation?" He quickly regrouped and gave a philosophical explanation. "Then death is the end of one life and the beginning of another." The old man smiled and continued questioning him. "What, then, are the Gui? What is the place of great disrespect?" Zhao Yunlin's patience ran out. "All right, what would you say it is?" A blinding light suddenly burst from the old man's eyes, so bright that it was briefly frightening. He grabbed Zhao Yunlin's arm, holding on so tightly that his fingers seemed on the verge of tearing right through the flesh. "Did you forget? In truth, Kunlun, death is—" He spoke like some doomed extra in a TV show, the kind who sobbed interminably and choked out a single clue, but didn't manage to actually name the murderer before finally dying. This particular old man, however, was cut off and cleanly... This particular old man, however, was cut off and cut cleanly in half right before Zhao Yunlan's eyes. The blade that killed him descended with overwhelming power, slicing him in two as one might split a melon. When the blade, wrapped in a bitter cold energy, struck snowy ground, a trench nearly a meter deep was left in its wake. The ground itself trembled from the blow. The dead man was somehow still on his feet, his bisected face forever frozen in that expression of indescribable fervor. Jalan Lan instinctively stepped to the side to avoid the meter-high spray of blood. Throat working hard, he slowly looked up at Shen Wei. "Are you all right? Hurry and come with me." Shen Wei reached out as he spoke, only to see Jalan Lan's pupils constrict minutely. He looked down at his own hand, as bloodied as a butcher's. Withdrawing it uneasily, he roughly wiped it on his cloak, but no amount of wiping made it feel clean. He made no further attempt to touch Jalan Lan. Instead, he tucked both hands into his sleeves, as if to avoid contaminating him. Voice tight with restraint, he said, "You vanished from me just now. Jalan Lan finally snapped out of it. He strode over and seized Shen Wei's hand. Shen Wei shuddered violently and tried to pull away, but Jalan Lan only held on tighter. "You're Shen Wei from 11 years later? Quick, how many drunken trysts have we had?" he asked. Any possible answer seemed like a waste of breath. Rather than reply, Shen Wei reached out again, this time ripping the water dragon pearl from Jalan Lan's wrist. In his hand, the pearl acted like cold water hitting a hot pan. There was a sizzle and a plume of black smoke as it transformed into a scale. Jalan Lan's eyes widened. He moved to take a closer look, but Shen Wei flipped his hand over and the scale disappeared. "Wait, wasn't that the water dragon pearl?" Jalan Lan asked. "What was that just now? It looked like it came from some kind of reptile, not a fish. Was it from a snake?" "You kept it on your person without even knowing what it was." Shen Wei's voice betrayed an abominable mood. "Not to mention, it came from someone else's body. Doesn't that strike you as unclean?" Jalan Lan looked at him, baffled. Shen Wei, fully aware that his jealous anger was unreasonable, could only hold Jalan Lan's gaze for a few moments. Unable to take it anymore, he turned away. A huge hole appeared behind him, as though the air had been ripped open. He pushed Jalan Lan's head down and shoved him into it. A cascade of light flowed before Jalan Lan's eyes, accompanied by the sense of being surrounded by a vast amount of water. Forgetting that he could not, in fact, breathe underwater, he didn't manage to hold his breath in time. "Shit!" he screamed silently, bracing himself to choke. But the instant his body touched the water, hands turned his head, and a soft tongue gently pushed his lips apart. Air filled his lungs. I don't think we had to tongue him to accomplish that, but I am the last person who's arguing. Hello? Thank you. With Jalan Lan in tow, Shen Wei swam upward at tremendous speed. Every time Jalan Lan began to run out of air, Shen Wei would pass him another breath. That's what we're calling it now. It took no more than 4 or 5 breaths before they broke the water surface. Jalan Lan thought about how long it had taken him to dive down, how he had nearly fallen asleep in the process. He now knew what it meant to be as swift as the wind. Shen Wei picked him up and set him in a ferry, not sparing a single glance for the trembling ferryman cowering in the corner. He tilted Jalan Lan's chin up. "The living must not drink the Wangchuan waters. Did you choke? How do you feel?" Jalan Lan wiped his face and reflected carefully on what seemed to have been an extraordinarily short journey. "I feel like I was riding a torpedo." That's a curious mental image. When Shen Wei let go of him, Jalan Lan fell back heavily, nearly capsizing the ferry. His legs were still a bit weak, perhaps because he'd just come up out of the water. There was a splash beside them as the faceless ferryman finally leaped into the water, sheer terror getting the better of him. Startled, Shen Wei hurriedly reached for Jalan Lan's arm. "What's wrong?" But even with Shen Wei's help, Jalan Lan didn't get up. So much time in the Wangchuan waters had left his hands pale and puffy, too soft and weak to exert any force. One hand nearly slid out of Shen Wei's grasp. He had been under the Huangquan for too long. His eyelids closed heavily as he pillowed his head against the side of the boat. "I'm dizzy," he moaned, through lips drained of color. "I'm taking you back immediately." Shen Wei tried to help him up, but Jalan Lan, either because he didn't want to cooperate or because he truly had no energy left, kept slipping back down. Shen Wei made a valiant attempt to carry him in his arms, but Jalan Lan was no girl with a pliable body. He was a man around Shen Wei's height, making him difficult to carry. It was easier when he was simply unconscious, but at this moment, Jalan Lan clung to consciousness just enough that he kept squirming out of discomfort. Shen Wei came perilously close to losing his grip on him entirely. Ultimately, he had no choice but to carry Zhao Yunlan on his back. "Don't forget the coat," Zhao Yunlan mumbled next to his ear. "Coat? What coat?" Just then, a little fairy ghost emerged from the water and dragged another fairy over. This one held a carefully folded coat, not an edge out of place. Shen Wei hesitated, but what could he do but bring it along? Once Shen Wei had carried Zhao Yunlan all the way home on his back, he laid him down gently on the bed. He took a step toward the bathroom to start running a hot bath, only for Zhao Yunlan, who'd seemed to be at death's door, to spring up as though he'd just received a shot of adrenaline. He shoved Shen Wei down on the bed. "Where do you think you're going?" Belatedly, Shen Wei realized he'd been duped. "So you're fine?" Zhao Yunlan's eyes curved with silent laughter. "I'm not fine. It's very serious. My wife ran away from home," he sighed. "Babe, stop running off. You're so gullible. What if you get trafficked?" Oh my god! Shen Wei was practically fuming with rage. He pushed Zhao Yunlan away, unsure how to even begin to express his fury. Finally, he fell back on cursing. "You're full of shit." Wreathed in smiles, Zhao Yunlan pulled Shen Wei's coat over and hugged it to his chest like a throw pillow. He rolled all over the bed, still smiling, and then, right in front of Shen Wei, he buried his face in the coat and inhaled deeply. "Hi-oh, you're swearing. It's lovely. Do it again." To Shen Wei's mind, he was clearly behaving like a pervert. Shen Wei reached out to grab his own coat. "Give me that." But Zhao Yunlan, a champion at rolling around in bed, continued to do so almost maniacally. Still clinging to the coat, he said in a sleazy voice, "No, if I give it back, what am I supposed to jack off to?" Shen Wei, both embarrassed and angry, had no answer. Whatever thought had flashed into his mind turned his cheeks scarlet. Zhao Yunlan looked up and said, very seriously, "You look like you really want to murder your husband." Kneeling on the bed, Shen Wei threw himself forward and caught a corner of the coat. He started to pull, and Zhao Yunlan continued to roll right off the edge of the bed. To no one's surprise, he hit the floor with a thump. After a moment, with the bed between them and each of them holding a corner of the coat, they both broke out into laughter. Zhao Yunlan finally sat up, clinging to the edge of the bed. "Hey, I want to ask you something." Shen Wei lowered his eyes and looked at him. As if they were having an idle conversation, Zhao Yunlan asked, "Is the Great Hotu seal about to kick the bucket? What are you planning to do?" Shen Wei stared, caught by surprise, and Zhao Yunlan continued, "Are you hoping that I'll stay with you, then die with you?" On top of the bedding, Shen Wei's hand curled into a tight fist, but Zhao Yunlan's smile was pure and true, without a hint of shadow or deceit. "Actually, I kind of get it now." Zhao Yunlan's soft voice struck Shen Wei's ears like a thunderclap. "The death Shenong keeps mentioning is chaos, right? You didn't let him finish, but I could tell." As he spoke, he climbed up onto the bed and went to Shen Wei, gathering him close. Shen Wei was completely rigid in his arms. Still soft, Zhao Yunlan said, "You've never asked me for anything. I don't even know how to suck up to you. But the truth is, If there's anything you really want, you could just tell me. And as long as I have it, so why lie to me? Shen Wei didn't make a sound. Jiao Lan slowly lowered his head, touching and lifting Shen Wei's chin. To Shen Wei's eyes, his gaze seemed tinged with helplessness and desolation. Look at me, Jiao Lan said. I want you to personally tell me each and every single thing you did. I don't want to waste my brain cells on wild guesses. Shen Wei, I care for you. I don't want to second guess you. Sometimes overthinking things can damage a relationship, but I'd rather not learn the truth from someone else. I've already shifted my boundaries for you time and again, and demeaned myself just as often, but if you keep doing this... Jiao Lan paused before continuing, voice steady. I'll really be angry with you. Jiao Lan's expression was calm. There was no sign of his usual bursts of temper in his voice, nor any trace of aggression. His lowered eyes held none of their usual sparkle. For a second, his face was that of the high and mighty mountain god of the great wild in Shen Wei's memory, as if Kunlun had returned. Utter terror boiled up in Shen Wei's heart. From the moment of his birth, he had looked at the world with disdain, with no comprehension of fear. But at this moment, he was racked with it. He knows, Shen Wei thought. Despite all my machinations, he found out. At the pinnacle of his fear, there was an instant in which the king of the Gui was gripped with the temptation to follow his natural instincts and slaughter the person before him. He could solve this problem the way the rest of his kind would, simply and violently. Then, once Shen Wei had consumed every last morsel, they would be one in flesh and blood. Nothing would remain in all the world that could threaten him so. No longer could anything make him tremble at the possibility of losing the one he loved. But Shen Wei was no longer the young king of the Gui from thousands of years ago, whose open heart had been a blank slate. Ruthlessly, cruelly, he had crushed his own instincts and nature underfoot, contorting himself into the kind of gentle, righteous person Kunlun Jun had once described. Restraint had long since been carved into his very bones. Shen Wei's face, pale to begin with, looked more and more as if it were made from snow. Not a hint of color touched his cheeks. An unspeakable chill bloomed in his heart, like a clear, silent stream. It was unaggressive, but in an instant it had spread throughout his body. By the time Shen Wei came back to himself, his limbs were numb. But Jiao Lan waited for him with endless patience, as if he had reserved every drop of patience he had in this life for Shen Wei. Jiao Lan sank his fingers into Shen Wei's hair, carefully combing through it. For some time he couldn't have said what he was feeling. His fingers curled unconsciously around the soft locks, suddenly remembering that day when Shen Wei's long hair had spilled all over his bed. Such unparalleled elegance. It might have been a lifetime ago. His mind wandered for a while longer. His heart was a melting pot of emotion, impossible to settle. Rationally, he knew he was dealing with a grave matter, but he was too lazy to think too hard about it. Perhaps sometimes, when faced with a dilemma, one might wish for time to stop, freeing them of the need to move forward or look back. Then they could stay in the same spot, deluding themselves. But all the clocks of the world kept ticking. Time stopped for no one. Jiao Lan closed his eyes, then opened them again. He moved the desk chair, placing it in front of Shen Wei, and dragged the coffee table between the two of them. Then he went into the kitchen and unearthed a dusty tea set from the depths of his cupboard. This man, who ate the type of instant noodles that came in bowls just so he could avoid doing dishes, actually spent 20 minutes washing the tea set, every last piece of it, clumsily yet meticulously, as if he needed to busy himself with something to calm down. Washing done, he placed the solid wood tea tray on the coffee table, set the water to boil in the small kettle, and got out a tin of tea from under the coffee table. "Is Iron Goddess okay?" he asked. Shen Wei could not have cared less whether the tin held Iron Goddess or Mud Bodhisattva. He just kept staring at Jiao Lan, following with his eyes as Jiao Lan went to the kitchen and washed every cup. It seemed as though looking away, even for a single moment, might cause Jiao Lan to vanish from his sight. Not having received an answer, Jalan Lan silently warmed the cups with hot water, rinsed the tea leaves, and placed the first cup of tea before Shen Wei. Steam and the tea's delicate fragrance filled the air, but alas, no one was in the mood to appreciate it. Shen Wei reflexively accepted the tiny cup, which held no more than a mouthful. His hand trembled so hard that half of its scant contents spilled. He looked down only when he felt the burn. Forcing his hand steady, he sat stiffly for a long time before finally raising the cup to his lips. He tossed it back as if it were his last drink before going to his death. "How did you find out?" he asked hoarsely. The memories in the great divine tree were intricately made. Very intricately. Jalan Lan cocked his head as though listening to the sound of the water boiling. They carefully strung together nearly everything I knew at the time and got my feelings all stirred up. But there were also enough flaws that after I calmed down, I immediately knew something was wrong. Shen Wei's face was empty. When he was expressionless, his composed brows were beautiful to the point of seeming otherworldly, breathtaking enough to steal one's soul. I should have realized ages ago that it would be stupid for someone to try misleading me by planting fake memories in the great divine tree. It would have been stupid for anyone, because you were with me at the time. If I got suspicious about anything, I would have asked you about it, and if your answers didn't match what I'd seen in the tree, obviously you're who I'd believe. By extension, you're the only person who could have planted the fake memories, Jalan Lan continued softly. You listened to what I said when I tried to trick Ghostface on the peak of Kunlun Mountain earlier on, and from that, you deduced what I already knew, right? After a brief silence, Shen Wei answered honestly with a small noise of affirmation. Things had gone far enough that attempting either shameless denial or a desperate cover-up would disgrace his status. The best choice now was to face the truth head-on. Jalan Lan looked him straight in the eyes. Fabricating so much in such a short amount of time just shows how capable you are. I can't believe Ghostface has the audacity to call himself your twin. I don't think you two are remotely similar other than in looks. Your intellect alone is worlds beyond his. Shen Wei simply maintained his upright posture, as though meditating. Naturally, when I began to realize that there was something fishy about the memories in the Great Divine Tree, my first suspect was Shenong. People who could tamper with the tree were few and far between, and in your story, you made sure to shine a spotlight on Shenong as a special character. Later, speaking with Shenong's mouth, you deliberately said all that stuff about time, life, and death. Was it because you guessed that as soon as Shenong's mortar noticed something, he would come out and try to use that to remind me? Jalan Lan laughed bitterly. And he did exactly that. You even got that right. You're capable and your luck is decent. Yes, Shen Wei admitted, after an even longer silence. I treasure you so much, Jalan Lan said. In all my life, I've never had feelings like this for anyone. His expression twisted for just a second as he spoke, as if slipping out of his control. But he reined it in a heartbeat, as though it had been a trick of the light. I didn't want to doubt you, even as I was doing my best to get to the bottom of those exquisitely crafted, sketchy memories. As I was trying to guess who was deliberately misleading me, I never even considered that it might be you. Shen Wei's expression was so stoic that it looked as if he might ascend at any moment, but the veins on the back of his hands suddenly stood out. The second time I felt like something was wrong was in front of the great sealing rock. Jalan Lan lowered his voice. Most of the memories inside were of times we had spent together. Nua only appeared for a moment to say a few vague words. They were very interesting words, carefully crafted to hint at the tragedy that unfolded back then, and that the tragedy happened because of Shenong. Jalan Lan exhaled lightly before continuing, but this time your luck wasn't as good, because then I bumped into Ghostface. Unknowing, he said something to me. All of Nua's memories are contained within. How could those few words be all of Nua's memories? I was enough of a mess at that moment that I didn't realize the implications. I even asked what my left soul fire had to do with Shenong, and Ghostface's reaction to that seemed to suggest that I was missing something I should have known. He laughed out loud about it, but you interrupted before he could say anything else. Now that I think about it, he probably realized that you'd even tampered with the memories within the great sealing rock, although I'm guessing that this time you weren't making stuff up. You just cherry-picked the truth. By now it was nearly dusk, but they didn't turn on the lights. As it got steadily darker, Shen Wei blended into the dimness like some emotionless god in a temple. But I still subconsciously discounted you as a suspect, even though my instincts had already pointed me in the right direction. Naive of me, huh? Jalan Lan sighed. And then, while I was carrying all those suspicions about Shenong, I met that old man. That was Shenong, right? No, Shenong is long dead, Shen Wei finally spoke. That's just an apparition he left behind. No wonder he could smile so joyfully even while being split from head to toe, Zhao Yunlan marveled, reaching a hand out toward Shen Wei. The water dragon pearl, that scale, I mean. Can I have it back now? Shen Wei brought out the scale that had been the water dragon pearl and placed it next to the tea tray. Zhao Yunlan picked it up with 2 fingers, studying it closely as he turned it over. It looks like a snake scale. Is it from Fuchsia or Nua? Nua, Shen Wei said. Nua's scale. No wonder the snake tribe worshipped it as something sacred. It took me back to 11 years ago, to where I followed Shenong's mortar down to the Huangquan Road, and where I saw you. You and the mortar in my dad's body had a whole conversation, and it sounded like you two really didn't get along. I thought you were behaving like someone I didn't know at all. I didn't want to believe any of it was real, but I felt like it had to be. So I went to buy a book in Ghost City, the same one I tried to find the source of a few days ago, the one the shopkeeper at that general store told me I had purchased myself 11 years ago, and as I expected, that book's existence proves that everything I saw was real. Shen Wei looked up at him. The book's called Record of Ancient Secrets. I'd read it before going to the peak of Kunlun Mountain. If it weren't for that book, I might have never gone up the mountain. Zhao Yunlan began speaking more slowly. All of a sudden, he was itching for a smoke. He fell silent and tapped his lighter gently on the table. A tiny flame shot up. The moment he lit the cigarette, the sound of its paper burning seemed unusually loud. I had the book on me at the time, but when the water dragon pearl transported me back 11 years, the book was suddenly nothing but empty pages because another copy already existed in that time. The exact same one, he paused. Right, I still haven't asked. How did you bring me back, anyway? The soul-executing blade can cut through anything. Shen Wei extended a finger and gently tapped Zhao Yunlan between the brows. Reflected in Shen Wei's eyes, Zhao Yunlan saw a golden light flash on his own forehead. Your soul bears my mark. Given enough time, I can always find you. That record of ancient secrets, what happened to it? Okay, first of all, your soul bears my mark? Hang on. Your soul bears my mark. That goes down in history as one of the great romantic lines of dialogue. I don't make the rules. That's just how it is. Page, what was that, 138 or 139? You will never, hello, 139. 139, volume 3. Your soul bears my mark. Okay. As I bump into the mic. I threw the copy I had on me into the Wang Chuan of 11 years ago, Zhao Yunlan said. On the one hand, Shenong was reminding me to be careful of you. On the other, he told me something. Not whatever he wanted to say at the end there, but what he'd been hinting at the moment the water dragon pearl took me away. He'd been hinting at the word cycle. When Shen Wei said nothing, Zhao Yunlan continued. So I bought the book. Many years later, I discovered it. Reading it put certain suspicions in my mind. When I tried to find its origin, I found out that I'd been the buyer, after which I was sent back 11 years, which was when I really bought that book. It's a cycle where the beginning is the end. But having left that cycle, Record of Ancient Secrets disappeared. It's stuck in there forever. The people on this huge globe can never reach the edge. The paths winding around a fixed circle are endless. In the cycle of reincarnation, one lives to die and dies only to live again. There is no real difference between life and death, so there is no true death. And that also corresponds to Fuchsia's concept of the Bagua. Shen Wei suddenly dropped his head, unable to keep from laughing at himself. You don't need to say any more, I understand. Zhao Yunlan turned aside and blew a smoke ring. By that point, you already knew that Shennon couldn't have been the one to plant the crudely constructed fake memories in the great divine tree. The primordial gods truly were as powerful as one would expect. They knew what happened 5,000 years before, and what would happen 5,000 years later, back when he left behind his shadow, Nua's scale. Back when he left behind his shadow, Nua's scale, and the dictated record of ancient secrets, he'd already predicted everything that would happen here and now. Each link connects perfectly to the next. The end is an echo of the beginning. Such is the work of the head of the three sovereigns, Shen Wei murmured. I truly cannot compare. Jalan Lan squinted within the white smoke. Picking up the teapot, he poured another cup for Shen Wei. No, you're just different people with different points of view. The me in the great divine tree, the one who raised the banner in revolt, the one whose heart was choked with all that grief, anger, and rebellion. None of those emotions were mine. They were yours, weren't they? Without thinking, Shen Wei picked up the little Zisha cup, brought it to his nose, and sniffed. Whatever he managed to glean from the scent only made him laugh helplessly. It's a shame I wasn't born earlier and missed out on that great battle of gods and demons. Zhao Yunlan lifted the kettle and added hot water to the teapot. So after telling all those lies and sending me on such a wild goose chase, can you finally tell me the truth now? Quietly, Shen Wei asked. Do you really want to hear it? Zhao Yunlan gave him a long, hard look. Nothing that comes from your lips, whatever it might be, could ever make me hate you. That was the end of the chapter. We're on page 143 for chapter 12. And actually, let me do some page math here real quick. Let me see how long this chapter is. 155. What are we on? 142, 13. I'm going to go ahead and play it safe and paranoid because I believe I need some hot water for my throat. So we're going to go ahead and take a break now. I'm going to do my best to keep it as short as possible, especially in case that we have to take another one in a little bit to be excessively paranoid about my throat. So I will be back in just a few minutes. I'm literally just going to get some more like hot tea. And we will continue with chapter 12. With chapter 12 on page 143. Alrighty, I will be right back. We are back. So, chapter 12, page 143. Whew. Go Cheng Chung's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. The number on the call display wasn't just unfamiliar, it was weird. It didn't look like it belonged to a cell phone or a proper handline, and there were a lot of inauspicious fours. That comes with a footnote. 4, which sounds like death in Chinese, is an unlucky number. That's right, I knew that. There were a lot of inauspicious 4s in the first few digits. It struck Go Cheng Chung as probably being a telemarketer. The serious things his colleagues were discussing were mostly over his head, but he still wanted them to see that he was doing his best to understand, so he ignored the phone and let it keep vibrating anyway. Even after the conversation had been going on for a while, the team hadn't reached any conclusions. Sounds like any typical meeting, but Chushu Jia made a fuss over fourth uncle's water dragon pearl. Chushu Jia spent most of his time in graves, and he walked the path of necromancy. He didn't exactly have a sunny disposition. He was occasionally a little dark, and what was more, he was a genuine conspiracy theorist. Your fourth uncle definitely knows more than he's letting on, Chushu Jia said decisively. Why else would he try to take you away at a time like this, and at the same time tell you to give the water dragon pearl to Director Zhao? Ju Hong's brow creased, and she crossed her arms in front of her chest. Everyone else, humans and ghosts alike, went silent. Then Lao Li, who worked at the gatehouse during the day, suddenly spoke up. Actually, I have some information. Everyone turned toward him, and he gave an embarrassed smile, seeming a bit ill at ease from the sudden attention. I'm just an old bachelor. I don't have much to do after work, but I like to go to Antique Street and play Shenqi and drink tea with some old pals. The other day I heard a chess buddy mention that in the last few days the snakes he worshipped at home to protect the house had all left. They wouldn't even eat any of his offerings. Apparently it's happening in other households too. It seems like the snake tribe wants to completely vacate the city. Ju Hong went very still. My uncle didn't tell me that. It's not just the snake tribe, Daching said. Think about it. Spring's almost here, but do you see so much as the shadow of a crow around? Those crow tribe bastards. The second there's even a whiff of trouble, they flee faster than rats. On the word rats, Daching unmistakably wrinkled his nose in an expression of extreme contempt. To a cat, perhaps the word rat could apply to everything worthy of contempt. My fourth uncle, Ju Hong paused, the furrow in her brow deepening. Fourth uncle had raised her. In her heart, there was basically nothing fourth uncle couldn't do. She had never seen him struggle in any situation. It seemed like as long as the snake tribe had him, the sky would never come crashing down. She understood that he probably hadn't mentioned anything to her because he was afraid her feelings for Jalan Lan ran too deep. If everything was fine, perhaps she would have simply left, having realized that she had no chance with Jalan Lan. But now that she knew he was in danger, how could she possibly just leave with her tribe? But how serious must the situation be for fourth uncle to be relocating the entire tribe? Everyone in the office felt as if they were lost in a heavy fog. Of them all, only Da Qing had a faint gut feeling. From the netherworld's abnormal behavior to that strange book from 11 years earlier, everything seemed to vaguely point back to the events of the primordial past, that sky-toppling, earth-shattering era when the gods fell to nothing. Jalan Lan's style had always been to work smarter, not harder. He had a remarkable gift for gathering people together, but wilted the moment anything required him to actually work. That loafer bossed the less lazy around. Honestly, he'd try to order around anyone he could. Sometimes when he felt too lazy to even read a subordinate's investigation report, he'd park his ass in his chair and make them read the report aloud. And yet whatever Jalan Lan was facing at this very moment, or rather what the soul guarding order was facing, he was keeping it all close to his chest rather than asking his subordinates to investigate a few details here and there. He most likely knew that even if his team did get involved, they'd be nothing but cannon fodder. He wanted to carry this burden himself. The Black Cat, understanding Zhao Yunlan's intentions, found an excuse to interrupt everyone's wild guessing. Xiaogou, Your phone's about to explode from all that vibrating. Aren't your hands numb? Answer the call. Addressing everyone else, he continued, How about this? This kind of speculation isn't going to get us anywhere. Day shift, go home and rest. As for the night shift, Sang-zun and Wang Zhong will head to Director Zhao's place together and see if he's back. If he hasn't returned before sunrise, I'll go back down to the Huangquan Road to look for him. And if that doesn't work, well, there's no shame in asking the netherworld for help once in a while. Having said all that, Da Qing leaped onto the table. With the serious air of a deputy director, he issued one more order. Zhuhong, give Lin Jing a call in a bit. Ask him whether he's on the train yet and when exactly he'll be back. Oh, okay, Zhuhong responded, then reached out to pet his fur and scratch his chin. Da Qing instantly went from an overbearing, aggressive king of beasts to a lazy kitten. Comfortable and relaxed from the scritches, he leaned on his front paws and started purring. There were a few suppressed snorts from the onlookers. Da Qing's head snapped up and he swatted Zhuhong's hand away with his claws. What impudence! Men and women mustn't openly touch in broad daylight. I'm male. Show some respect. Off to the side, Lao La subconsciously rubbed the bone ring on his finger. Kissing up a little, he said, Da Qing, you've been so busy all day. Would you like some dried fish? I fried some yesterday at home. Da Qing tried to act disinterested, but his pricked up ears betrayed him. Eventually, he extended a paw and permitted Lao Li to tote him away with the attitude of an empress dowager waited on by a servant. Flawless cat behavior. Go Chengcheng finally picked up the call that had been harassing him so persistently. Cheap, domestically made phones were very loud. The voice yelling from the other end of the line was audible from 2 steps away. Whoever it was had a thick, heavy accent and spoke with nearly gravity-defying speed. Go Chengcheng listened politely until the person finished, then weakly said, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat it? Slower? There were a few seconds of silence, followed by a sudden heart-wrenching sob from the other end. It might have just been the garbage quality of Go Chengcheng's phone, but there was something unique about the sobbing. It spread like waves from the phone through the entire office. Chu Shuzhe, about to pack up and leave, abruptly turned back. He snatched Go Chengcheng's phone, switched it to speaker, and set it on the desk. Go Chengcheng froze up. Chu Shuzhe raised a finger to his lips and kept listening carefully, then grabbed a pen from the holder and wrote on a sticky note, That's a ghost crying. Goosebumps erupted all over Go Chengcheng's body. Chu Shuzhe whispered quickly, Tell her to stop crying. Ask what's wrong. Go Chengcheng did his best to calm the caller down, and after a long time the crying eased as the person tried her best to speak through the tears. In accented Mandarin, she said, Go Lasha, do you still remember me? 3 years ago, when you were teaching here, you visited my home. My daughter's name is... I'm not entirely sure how to say it. Shu Yun is the other, but the first... It wouldn't be like Sway, would it? C-U-I? Sway? Something closer to that? Certainly not Sui. Interesting. Actually, hello. I should be writing that down to look up. Because that is an interesting combination of things that I have not run into yet. I served you a bowl of vegetable tofu. This time, Go Chengcheng finally understood what was being said. After a brief moment, it came back to him. Oh, of course I remember. Hello, Sui. Hello, Sui. Sui Shuyun's mom. She started sobbing again. Shuyun disappeared. The young girl he'd met 3 years before would have been 15 or 16 by now, not really young enough to be considered a lost child. Go Chengcheng asked, How could a girl her age disappear? She didn't run off into the mountain to play by herself, did she? Fascinated, Chu Shuzhe looked at him. It struck him that when Go Chengcheng spoke to people in need, he spoke more naturally, and his words flowed more smoothly. It's 'cause he's the best boy! What do we expect? The woman on the line kept breaking into tears again as soon as she got anxious, and once she started crying, she went back to speaking in dialect. Communicating with her was like a chicken talking to a duck. Go Cheng Chung was dripping with sweat before he finally grasped the situation. The girl's father made some money working out of town, and he'd bought her a cell phone. It wasn't a good imported brand, but by local standards it was still considered quite fancy. The sheltered girl quickly lost herself in her new smartphone and learned to go online, where she made a few uncouth friends. One such friend had made the long trip to meet her and said they could take her to Dragon City and find her a job. It hadn't taken much to trick the foolish girl and lure her away. The only thing she'd left for her family was a note. Ask if she can leave and come to Dragon City, Chushuja instructed. Go Cheng Chung did as he was told, and the woman became a bit evasive. I can't leave the village, she said. I'm a bit sick. Chushuja understood. If she was unable to leave her place of death, this was a low-level earthbound spirit. Go Cheng Chung tried again. Is there anyone else at home? Just an old granny. Go Laosha, please. You're the only one I know in Dragon City. Please help me out. Help me find her. My girl is so young. She doesn't know anything about the world. Dragon City was massive, crammed full of people and cars. Finding a single person was like looking for a needle in a haystack, and who even knew what the girl might look like now after 3 years? 3 years during which puberty had struck, even. It was entirely possible that Go Cheng Chung wouldn't recognize her, even if she was right in front of him. Chushuja shook his head and wrote, "Don't agree to it." The living should never casually agree to a ghost's request. Superstitions about it abounded. If you took on the task and were unable to follow through, you'd only bring trouble on yourself. But that's Go Cheng Chung's superpower. But by the time Chushuja finished writing, Go Cheng Chung had already responded. Of course, Shuyin's mom. Don't worry. I promise to find her and bring her back. What'd I say? The tip of Chushuja's pen dragged across the paper, leaving a long mark. But just as he was about to scold Go Cheng Chung and say how disappointed he was, Go Cheng Chung glowed white with his merits, and they seemed to change color. For just an instant, a flame-like orange flash passed across his entire body. Shocked, Chushuja grabbed Go Cheng Chung's shoulder. Go Cheng Chung hung up the phone and gave him a confused look. Nothing. I must have been mistaken, Chushuja mumbled. Having reconsidered the situation, he set his bag back down. How do you plan to find her? I'll help you. Right around then, Wang Zheng and Sung Zan, the 2 ghosts who had been sent to Jalan Lan's apartment, arrived. They knocked politely, but when there was no sound from inside, Wang Zheng led Sung Zan right through the door. There were no lights on, but the coffee table had been moved. Both the chair and bed seemed to have been sat on, and the fire was still on for the kettle, which had nearly boiled dry. There was no one to be seen. Sung Zan leaned over and examined the abandoned tea tray, turning off the stove without needing to be told how. They came back, then laughed again, he concluded. The 2 of them laughed before dark. He's getting better, actually. Setting out tea indicated a long discussion. What had they talked about? Another scene break. At dusk, after Zhao Yunlan had said those words to Shen Wei, words almost as solemn as a vow, Shen Wei just gazed at him for a while, as though drowning in Zhao Yunlan's eyes. Finally, softly, he agreed. All right. But then he only stared into the curling white steam rising from the teapot. There was something faintly lost about his expression. As he started reflecting on his tens of thousands of years of memories, the weight of his great age seemed to settle on his shoulders. I don't know where to start, Shen Wei said at last. He exhaled lightly and held out a hand to Zhao Yunlan. With a sad smile, he said, Why don't you see for yourself? Zhao Yunlan thought he had every reason to keep his guard up around Shen Wei, but before his brain could catch up, he took the proffered hand. Shen Wei's grip closed hard on his hand, yanking Zhao Yunlan toward him. It made Zhao Yunlan feel like they were about to crash into each other. He instinctively made a grab for the bed frame to stop his own momentum, but his fingers passed right through it, as if nothing were there. In the next moment, he seemed to fall into something. He stumbled, but gentle hands caught hold of him. Zhao Yunlan opened his eyes wide, but he couldn't see anything at all. He could only clutch the hands that were steadying him. Shen Wei? Shen Wei made a quiet, wordless sound of acknowledgement. Despite the absolute darkness, there was nothing tranquil about their surroundings. There was a sound like howling. There was a sound like howling, shrieking wind. But Zhao Yunlan couldn't feel even the faintest breath of moving air. He fell silent and listened intently. It somehow sounded like both a wail and a roar. It rose and fell, sometimes nearby and sometimes distant. Eventually, Jalan Lan couldn't resist asking, "What is that?" Shen Wei's grip tightened on his hands. "Wait a second." Before the sound of his words faded, the entire world suddenly brightened. There came the far-off, agonized cry of a dragon. The ground started to shake. Next, a ball of fire, like the sun itself, fell from the sky. Its heat was scorching. The shift from extreme darkness to extreme brightness made Zhao Yunlan's eyes burn with tears, but he endured the pain of it, refusing to close them. He felt rather as though he was seeing the creation of the world. When the tremendous fire struck, it splintered into innumerable shards. The sparks reflecting off the ground looked like flakes of gold, creating the sense that one was stepping into the Milky Way. The staggeringly beautiful display of light and colors was enough to steal the breath from their lungs. Then, from beneath the fragments of flames, countless hands reached up, as if sprouting from the mud. Slowly, beings emerged, adjusting their shapes as they grew to roughly the height of a man, and climbed out of the muck. They had no creator. Their life came solely from the mud and silt. No one taught them how to live or how to procreate. Their stumbling became walking, and then running as they learned to move across the vast ground that was strewn with shattered light. And then, out of pure instinct, they learned to kill and consume one another. These were the Gwei, born in the crack between light and darkness. Where the ball of flame had initially landed, a huge fire burned. The mud beneath it swelled, gradually forming into a large flower bud. The bud grew larger and larger as the fire atop it dwindled, and finally, the last of the flame was completely swallowed by the bud of mud. All at once, every one of the Gwei, the running, slaughtering, feeding Gwei, stopped what they were doing and looked in that direction. There was a sudden crack and then a clattering as the flower bud shattered open into several petals, like ceramic shattering in the kiln. Holy God in heaven, art! Hang on. Two pitch-black figures stretched out from within. The nearest Gwei was inexorably drawn toward them and consumed before it could even struggle. The figures fed, and the more Gwei they consumed, the more clearly defined they became. Heads, necks, torsos, limbs, facial features, and even hair gradually took shape. The mud Nua had flicked so casually, the Gwei born from mud. It seemed as though all things born from the mud were being driven by some unexplainable force, moving in the same direction as they grew, exactly the same as the sages and gods. Or perhaps it was that the gods and sages, born from the earth and sky, had come into existence in the same way. "That was my soul fire that just fell, right?" Jalan Lan asked. "And that's you and Ghostface growing from the flower." "Yes, that's us. At the time, you were protecting the Wu and the Yao, as Chiyo had charged you." Right by his ear, Shen Wei's voice was low and calm as he explained. No one could have known that only a few dozen years after the first war of gods and demons, the water god Gonggong and Emperor Juanshu would start the second war of gods and demons. The water god was close with the dragon tribe, so they formed an alliance with the Yao. Then Hou from the east found Fushi's bow, gathered Chiyo's former subordinates, and ganged up with the Wu. The Wu, the Yao, and the humans were all dragged into the war. The fighting couldn't be stopped. Order had yet to be established, Shen Wei continued. It hadn't been long since Nua first created humans. She could only watch as they reproduced, wave after wave, and died, wave after wave. Before she turned into Hotu, the netherworld didn't exist, so there were no such things as life, death, or reincarnation. To those who lived in those days, death was death. Let me show you this art here. Yeah. They continue to not only know exactly what moments to illustrate, they then illustrate it beautifully, wonderfully, amazingly. Especially considering the fact that it's not even full color. It's not even color. It's they do this much with not even. I'm alright. I just, you know what? As Shenong said, Death meant a return to the chaos, returning to the empty place of great disrespect. Naturally, everyone feared death. That is way too much of my own face. There we are. Naturally, everyone feared death, especially those who died with resentment. They refused to close their eyes and go, so they were caught between life and death, their souls remaining forever in the world. During both wars of gods and demons, the vast amount of blood spilled formed rivers. The souls that refused to leave hung in the air, endlessly wailing. They refused to let go or disappear. During the day, they suffered under the blistering sun. Some of them melted beneath it and returned to chaos. Others hung on and were able to recover slightly during the night, only for the torture to resume the next day. Shen Wei fell silent, gazing at the place of his birth. After a while, he continued. That's when Nua knew that her act of creation wasn't worthy of merits. It was a sin. She gave humans resplendent but short lives, as weak as a spring flower. And after that short life, they had to experience all the suffering of the world, the pain of being burned by the sun, the pain of their restless souls having nowhere to go, and the pain of being pursued by death every day of life. He glanced at Jalan Lan. Some say that babies cry when they are born because they are one step closer to death. All of that is why Shenong, whose godhood was lost by then, had no choice but to borrow your soul fire. He wanted to use the mountain god's soul to safeguard all the resentful spirits who had died from battle and lessen their suffering, that they might find peace sooner. That's why the wooden plaque you wound up leaving behind was called the Soul Guarding Order. I'm going to reread that paragraph, well, at least most of that paragraph. All of that is why Shenong, whose godhood was lost by then, had no choice but to borrow your soul fire. He wanted to use the mountain god's soul to safeguard all the resentful spirits who had died from battle and lessen their suffering, that they might find peace sooner. That's why the wooden plaque you wound up leaving behind was called the Soul Guarding Order. The crack overhead grew and grew until it was large enough to reveal a sliver of the sky. Soft, faint moonlight filtered down. Out of nowhere, Jalan Lan was gripped by the feeling that Buzhou Mountain was about to fall completely. Shen Wei resumed his explanation. It just so happened that Shenong passed by Buzhou Mountain, carrying your soul fire that was meant to deliver all living things, just as Gong was riding the divine dragon straight for the mountain. The divine dragon's tail brushed against Shenong and knocked your soul file from his hands, and then, coincidentally, it landed in the place of great disrespect at the foot of Buzhou Mountain. He paused, then gave a cold laugh. Of course, it was you who told me all of this. I don't know how true it is. Perhaps it really was a coincidence, or perhaps Shenong did it deliberately. Who can say? Right then, Jalan Lan saw two figures land in the place of great disrespect, which was now exposed to the mortal realm, Kunlun-jun and Shenong. After all, this was Shen Wei's memory. Everything was from his point of view. Through Shen Wei's eyes, Jalan Lan watched as the handsome, beautiful, young mountain god of the great wild peered around curiously. There was even some innocent childishness to his face. Kunlun-jun seemed a bit lost as he stared at the ground, which seethed with monsters and devils. What are these? He asked. They are part of the natural order, Shenong replied. It's the end of the chapter. We are on page 157. For chapter 13. I believe, given the length of chapter 13, this should be the last chapter for the day, because I think it might be, yeah, it's a little bit longer than your average chapter, so this should be the last one for the day. There's a comment that sums it up rather nicely. He was literally made to take pain away from souls and bear it himself, but he passed that pain on to Shen Wei unwittingly through his soul fire, and that's how he became the soul executing emissary. Yeah. Yeah. That's what it's looking like. Shenong grabbed hold of Kunlun's wrist. His aged, murky eyes were fixed on the naive yet savage Gui as he walked forward. He was already very old. Kunlun could only lean slightly forward and carefully support him. The faintest shadow crossed Kunlun face when he looked down at Shenong. Old age meant Shenong was close to death. Though Kunlun had never experienced old age or death, he could smell the frightening scent of decay clinging to the old man. You heard my last discussion with Nua, I take it? Shenong asked. Kunlun's brow wrinkled. Who'd be interested in your debates? Just tell me what we're supposed to do now. I can't believe you're even mentioning Nua. If she knew you'd accidentally burned through the Great Fuchsia seal, you'd be lucky if she didn't try to hunt you down, and doing it with my soul fire means you're bringing trouble down on my head, too. She wouldn't do that, said Shenong. There was a passive-aggressive note in the noise Kunlun made in response. Then Shenong coughed, and even his cough sounded old. Life and death are serious matters, he said. All life fears death, and one shouldn't joke about it. But if you can jump out of the cycle of life and death, then you'll have no more need to fear. I'm standing right here and not jumping anywhere. Kunlun tone was haughty. Nor do I need to be afraid. I think you're the one who should be frightened. But I should tell you that the great divine tree has borne fruit. Only 2 fruits have ripened in the last century. I gave one to my furball and saved the other for you. It'll extend your life by another 100 years. I thank you, but I don't fear death, Shenong smiled. Oh, little Kunlun, you don't understand. If one doesn't die, doesn't perish, then one cannot become a god. Perhaps once we're all dead, you'll understand. Kunlun rolled his eyes and glanced around as if hoping to find something to stuff into Shenong's yammering mouth. There will be hope, though. As they were about to leave, Shenong took another long look at the Gui, who carpeted the ground. If life could spring forth from even this most barren of places, surely nothing remains impossible. Kunlun was steadying him as they crossed the uneven ground, but upon hearing this, he turned back to look at the 2 Gui closest to them. One was holding the other's head and gnawing on it. The mountain god of the great wild furrowed his brows again. What kind of shitty life is this? I think you're just senile. You should be thinking about how you're going to explain all this to Nua. With that, Kunlun and Shenong left the place of great disrespect. Shen Wei, who'd watched in silence, tugged on Jalan Lan's hand. Let's go. As they followed Kunlun, Shen Wei said, With your intellect, I imagine you already knew that what Shenong was thinking back then. You just disagreed, thinking it was a wild fantasy. Jalan Lan gathered his thoughts. Okay, so Shenong wanted to create the reincarnation cycle. That way, as long as souls still existed, they could enter the 6 paths of reincarnation, where life would become death and death would become life. That was what he meant about standing outside of life and death, right? Shen Wei gave a light laugh. Shenong wanted to use the darkness beneath the Great Seal to separate out the yin and yang on the edge of true death, thereby creating the reincarnation cycle. But he obviously didn't succeed, Jalan Lan said. If he had, Nua wouldn't have died for the Great Seal. Do you know why he failed? Shen Wei stopped walking. A peculiar smile appeared on his face, and he continued before Jalan Lan could answer. He couldn't create the reincarnation cycle because there is only emptiness and chaos. The Gui born from chaos don't have souls. Great evil. A soulless being. We are nothing but physical manifestations of chaos. Violence incarnate. From the lowest to the highest of us, from the cradle to the grave, all we can do is instinctively consume and plunder. The craving for the freshest flesh and blood drives us. For the first time, Shen Wei realized that he felt a kind of pleasure in saying it aloud. It was the kind of enjoyment someone might feel when squeezing their own wound or cutting into their own flesh with a knife. Every now and then, Shen Wei does or says something to where you just kind of at him. And me, because you elevated me to divinity by force, I became an anomaly. Neither human nor god, neither devil nor ghost. In all the world, I alone was entirely unlike anything else in existence. Jalan Lan couldn't say anything. Since the moment Jalan Lan had revealed that he knew Shen Wei was lying to him, Shen Wei had felt as if a lump of ice had sunk down into his heart. There it stayed, unable to go up or down. It had left him deeply chilled on top of his struggle to keep everything bottled up inside. But now, having said all that, he felt a miraculous sort of lightheartedness. We are chaos, he said. Chaos that can walk and move through the world. What Ghostface said to you wasn't wrong either. Death itself came to life thanks to a single flame and birthed us, these supposed living things that are neither alive nor dead. What an interesting coincidence. Shen Wei's smile faded. He glanced over his shoulder at Jalan Lan, voice almost gentle. But you, without the faintest regard for your own life, you had to come and provoke me. Do you know what you've lured in? Do you realize how dangerous this is? Jalan Lan slung an arm around him from behind. Come on, get to the point. Less of this bullshit. Through the embrace, his body heat flowed into Shen Wei. It felt like the first sip of warm porridge after being frozen to the very bone. It was enough to make one tremble. Shen Wei was silent for a while. Before he continued, he reached up and grasped Jalan Lan's hands in front of his chest. Buzhou Mountain collapsed. The sky fell and the earth sank, thus unexpectedly ending the war between the humans, the Yao, and the Wu. The endless rain pouring from the hole in the sky washed over the resentful spirits floating in midair and struck the ground, from which nothing grew, and billions of Gui climbed out of the abyss, all of which you must have seen in the great divine tree. Actually, the day of my birth should have been the first time I saw you, but you were standing too far away, unwilling to take even a single step closer to me, as though I were something filthy. My eyes hadn't fully opened yet, so all I could see was the vague shadow of a green robe. Shen Wei shut his eyes. Gently, longingly, he rubbed his cheek against Jalan Lan's hand. Just had to take a second to absorb that mental image. And then lose my place entirely. Thank you. But from birth, I was more ferocious than my brother. I had consumed more of our brethren than he had. At that point, I could already hear and could vaguely understand what you and Shenong were saying. So right from the beginning, I knew exactly what I was. Later, I searched the world for you, resisting the temptation of the flesh and blood of the living. I ate only the things that crawled out of the ground, other Gui which I felt were just as disgusting as I was. I searched for you because I desperately wanted to ask you what life is. When he said this, Shen Wei felt Jalan Lan's grip on him tighten. But then when I finally met you at the edge of that grove, when you were about to climb up Peng Lai, as soon as I saw you, the words all died on my tongue. Why did I want to ascend Peng Lai at the time? Jalan Lan asked hoarsely. Of the three great divine mountains of the Great Wild, Buzhou had already fallen, and Kunlun was the forbidden place of gods, closed to all mortals. That left Peng Lai as the only one that could shelter and protect the living beings on Earth. But not all. There were too many of them. Of the humans, the Wu, and the Yao, the mountain could hold only two. The rest of them would have to wait for Nuwa to prepare the stones of many hues and repair the sky. Their fate was up to the heavens. Shen Wei suddenly stopped for a moment. Up to the heavens. I despise that phrase. Then wouldn't they start fighting each other? Shenong originally thought that, as the mountain god, you would be biased toward the Wu and the Yao, casting humans aside, Shen Wei said. He wanted to personally lead Zhuan Shu, I keep on wanting to reverse that, Zhuan Shu, up the mountain to see you, but you surprised him. You set up an array at the foot of Peng Lai Mountain. It was a simple altar holding Chiyo's head, right in the middle of the path up the mountain. The Yao had always worshipped Chiyo as their ancestor, so they immediately knelt to pay their respects. And the humans, having had the Yellow Emperor, Xuanyuan, at their helm, also worshipped Chiyo as a war god. Therefore, Juan Shu, this is little all over again. Therefore, Zhuan Shu had the humans stop and stand behind the Yao with their heads lowered in respect. Only the Wu ignored it completely. In their hurry to claim a spot on the mountain, they offered neither respect nor worship. They walked past Chiyo's head as if it wasn't there, and the moment they passed by, Chiyo's head vanished and the true path up the mountain materialized. The Wu, having already gone past, were deceived by illusion and trapped in the abyss below the mountain. That, then, was why the Yao sang about the fall of Buzhou Mountain. That had been their chance to overtake the Wu. They finally had a solid place in the land of the Great Wild, on equal footing with humans, even if it almost coughed. Even if it didn't last more than a few years. You took me with you, and we walked across the Great Wild, which was filled with wailing, Shen Wei said. From Kunlun Mountain to the Peach Blossom Grove, and from the grove to Penglai Mountain, I watched you save people, slaughter Gui that were feeding upon humans, and get dragged into the war between the different races. We Gui had always viewed each other as things to be consumed. We had no sentiment for our own kind. Back then I didn't understand anything. I didn't understand what they were fighting about. I just thought it was wasteful that you killed without eating. And all the while you became more and more silent. Come on, let's go up the mountain. Shen Wei turned and wrapped an arm around Jalan Lan's waist. Lights blurred across Jalan Lan's vision, and an instant later they arrived at the foot of Penglai Mountain. With one leap, Shen Wei took Jalan Lan up to the peak. From that great height, no lightning could be seen. There was only the sky, so dark and heavy that it seemed about to fall. Layers of mist billowed off the ceaseless rain, carrying an indescribable stench. There, at the peak, Jalan Lan saw Nua. She was alone among the clouds, long snake tail extended behind her. Below, Kunlun Jun and the young king of the Gui watched her from afar. At this point, Kunlun Jun looked nothing like he had when first visiting the place of great disrespect with Shennong. He was skinnier now, making his already pronounced features seem even wearier. His gaze, however, was bright and resolute. His eyes were like burning torches on his gaunt visage. Nua turned, worry written across her beautiful face. Kunlun, what if Shennong was wrong? She said. What if we were all wrong? Kunlun Jun's hands were tucked into his sleeves. His sleeves and sash billowed wildly in the fierce wind. If we're wrong, he said serenely. In that case, we'll atone with our lives and die for the cause. Then, when the Great Wild once again gives rise to a stronger, more powerful person like Pangu, he will learn from our mistakes and finish what we couldn't. Nua sighed, her brows relaxing. You're right. Shennong was wrong once, and I hope he won't be wrong a second time, but even if he was, we can no longer turn back. You've grown up so much, truly. It makes me feel that even after I die, I can safely entrust this piece of land to you. The mere words of the primordial gods held power. No sooner had she spoken than Kunlun Jun felt the immense pressure crash down upon his shoulders. But he didn't move an inch. Not even the king of the Gui behind him noticed anything wrong. Kunlun Jun extended a palm to catch the rain falling from the sky, carefully feeling the crushing weight of the heavy sky and earth pressing down on him. I recently came to understand something, actually, he said. Humans are so weak and small, they can never be free of the three worms, greed, rage, and delusion. Their six senses are tainted. They're stupid and nearsighted, violent and drawn to conflict. Why were such great merits bestowed upon you for creating such useless things? Why do the heavens keep choosing humans over and over? Kunlun Jun squinted into the sea of rolling clouds in the distance, and the stones of many hues hidden among them. Now I understand. Humans are what most resemble the heavens, the earth, and us. How so? Nua asked. From the moment they're born, humans know that they will die. Each day brings them one step closer to death, whether they be heroes or cowards. Dozens of years vanish like smoke at a snap of the fingers, after which every single one meets the same end. It's as though they were born to die, Kunlun Jun said softly. But look, Every day that they are alive, they struggle fiercely for warmth, food, power, riches, love, another day to live, anything you can think of. They escape from the jaws of death countless times, only to perish in their final struggle, completely exhausted. I don't understand what you're saying. Two voices spoke as one, as the young king by Kunlun Jun's side and Shen Wei by Jalan Lan's side opened their mouths at the same moment. To Jalan Lan's ears, the youth's bright, clear voice and the man's rich, lower timbre formed a strange duet. He had the sudden sense that it was he himself standing there. He and Kunlun Jun bled together in his mind. Fully formed words appeared on his tongue, leaving his mouth without his volition. His voice overlapped with Kunlun Jun's from thousands of years ago. Sealing the Gui away was indeed unjust. But when the Wu were trapped and washed away by the flood, the sin of their destruction fell upon me. I bear the guilt, but my conscience is clear. If the reincarnation cycle and eternal life that Shenong spoke of can't be achieved, if we failed, if we're wrong, if we've created an even greater disaster, then it was simply a failed attempt in our continued struggle. If we all die, new gods will still come. They'll be the next to struggle for eternal life, just like us, even though we know there's no such thing as eternity, much as how all humans will eventually die. Kunlun Jun suddenly turned to look at the young king of the Gui behind him, and then his gaze swept past him. It seemed to come to rest on Jalan Lan, several millennia in the future. Even though he knew Kunlun Jun couldn't see anything, Jalan Lan still felt as though he was looking back into his own eyes across the chasm of time. If death is chaos, then life must be endless struggle. The corners of Kunlun's mouth turned up into something that was almost a smile. The ghost of dimples showed on his face. But if his smile was like that of a child, his eyes were those of an old man. Nua, go ahead. With me... It did it to me again. With me here, you don't need to worry about anything you leave behind. As he heard the entire conversation at last, Zhao Yunlan finally understood how Shen Wei had cherry-picked from such a compassionate, lamenting speech and given it a completely different flavor. Nua gave Kunlun Jun a long look. The stones flashed, and a stream of brilliant, iridescent rocks flew into the sky, where they collided with the thick, heavy clouds. There came a great roar and an alarming explosion of thunder and lightning. All the humans and Yao on the mountain bowed down and prostrated themselves at once. The thunder continued for what seemed like ages, but finally it stopped. Several months passed before the sky cleared, but auspicious clouds eventually appeared, and the sun revealed itself once more, shining down on the wasted, scorched earth. From her place in the sea of clouds above Penglai, Nua had disintegrated. Her 3 ethereal souls formed the new Great Seal. Her body turned into Hotu, and her 7 corporeal souls landed in the thousands of mountains and bodies of water. Thin blades of grass grew from the cracks and rocks, revealing the green of new birth. At some point, Shenong, old and doddering, had climbed up to the peak. "I'm leaving too," he told Kunlun Jun. Then he fell to the ground, body turning rigid in death. His divine spirit, so long suppressed within a human body, whistled as it flew into the ground and became the reincarnation cycle. Something seemed to draw the souls that wandered in the air night and day, and they followed after him. The earth gently quaked, steadied by the mountain river all. The reincarnation dial atop the 3-life rock began to spin, and the merit brush floated above the ancient merit tree. As it rose out of the thousands of Zhang of the Wangchuan's waters, every soul now had a record of their merits and sins. "One last thing," Kunlun Jun said softly. The sky above him was suddenly covered in dark, heavy clouds. Lightning flashed as though divine retribution was about to crash down upon them. My soul fire set the place of great disrespect alight. Its flames spurred the Gui out of the mud, yet I left them to their own devices rather than caring for them. I decided all on my own whether the Gui should live or die. It truly is a great sin. But there is one last thing I need to do. As Zhao Yunlan watched, Kunlun Jun extracted his heart's blood and turned it into a wick, while his body became a lamp. He suddenly felt like he had always known that these things had happened, not just from the great divine tree or the rock of the great seal, but from living through them himself. It was as though he had briefly forgotten them, and now remembered. Thus was the reincarnation cycle created. Life and death became a circle, and life and death were no more. Kunlun Jun's primordial spirit left his body. The mighty mountain winds swept past the little king of the Gui, who was crying himself sick. Then they both went down to the Huangquan River to guard the gate of the Great Seal. Jalan Lan turned to Shen Wei. And then what happened? Why did you say Shenong was your sworn enemy? Shen Wei was slow to answer, looking in the direction that the despondent little king of the Gui had gone. Finally he murmured, Actually, I have great respect for Shenong. He was truly more like a god than you or Nua. Wait. Zhao Yunlan raised a hand to stop him, brow furrowing as he thought, This is all your fault for not being honest with me. Your lies are all over the place, but there's a glimmer of truth in every direction. Trying to make sense of it is giving me a headache. Let me get this straight. When Nua created humans, Kunlun, my past life, was a little dumbass with zero filter who was barely out of diapers. I said there was something in the mud of creation, so Nua realized that humans had inherited the three worms, greed, wrath, and delusion, from the mud they were made from. Is that when Nua foresaw the inevitable great war of gods and demons that would be brought about by humanity? Shen Wei nodded. Yes. Later, Nua called Fuxia over. The two of them built the great Fuxia seal that suppressed the flames in the ground, and that's how the place of great disrespect came to be, Zhao Yunlan continued. Then his tone changed. Oh, right, I wanted to ask. Legend says the two of them were a couple. Is that true or false? True, Shen Wei answered. Wow, sometimes gossip gets it right. Okay. After the Fuxia seal was created, everything was peaceful for a few short years, but the great war of gods and demons happened anyway, which was the Yellow Emperor versus Chiyo. As they fought, Chiyo realized he was about to lose, so his spirit left his body and went to Kunlun Mountain to find Kunlun Jun. He begged Kunlun Jun to take care of his underlings, the Wu and Yao, but since Kunlun Jun was the type who's too lazy to rotate the ring of flatbreads around his neck to eat the next one, he didn't want to deal with that. Unfortunately, the god kneeling and kowtowing up the mountain every step of the way like he was worshipping heaven and earth was just a little too much. And also, Kunlun Jun had a stupid gluttonous cat that unknowingly licked some of Chiyo's blood. That meant Kunlun Jun had to come out and return the favor, and he finally agreed. By the way, that stupid troublemaker of a cat is Da Qing, right? God fucking damn it, I always knew that damn fatty was going to fuck shit up for his father. In the first war of gods and demons, Kunlun Jun was able to preserve both the Wu and Yao. He gave them a place to live and cultivate and looked after them for many generations. But the peace didn't last very long before the second war of gods and demons begins. This time it was an internal conflict between the Yellow and Flame Emperors. The water god Gonggong and Zhuanshu, descendant of the Yellow Emperor, faced off against each other, while He Yi tried to take advantage of how chaotic everything was. The three realms descended into messy conflict, and the Wu and Yao were dragged into it once again. Since there were more humans, Wu and Yao around this time than there had been before, more of them died, providing Shenong with more specimens. Shenong reached two conclusions: that death is chaos, and that the souls who are not content with chaos cannot find peace, and are therefore in more pain. Humanity, Nua's creation, lived unhappy lives and died in pain, so Shenong and Nua discussed ways to break away from death forever. That's when Shenong thought of reincarnation. There was an edge to Shen Wei's laugh. Perhaps it was simply because he himself had become mortal and had to face a mortal life. Short like a cicada, born in the spring and dying in the fall. Perhaps it was only because he was afraid of death. Zhao Yunlan shook his head. Later, in the name of soul guarding, Shenong asked for the soul fire from my left shoulder. But when he passed by Buzhou Mountain, he unfortunately got caught in the crossfire when Gonggong carried out the world's first suicide bombing, and he dropped the fire. The way he's phrasing these things. I think he did it on purpose, Shen Wei scoffed. He was just afraid of not being able to justify it to Nua, so he found an excuse. He wanted to set up reincarnation deep beneath the surface from the very beginning. Okay, you can let go of your grudge. He's already suffered retribution. Zhao Yunlan pulled out a cigarette and lit it, squatting down on the ground. Like a large monkey, he rested his arms on his knees and carelessly polluted the air at the top of the divine mountain. Then, after the accidental creation of the Gui, Shenong realized you were missing something. You didn't have souls. Not only was it impossible to build a reincarnation cycle on top of you, but as soon as the Great Seal opened even a crack, you'd go to the surface and bring ruin upon all living things. The sky leaked and the earth sank, so the gods collectively brought the living up onto Peng Lai. The Wu were abandoned because they forgot the hand that fed them, while the humans and the Yao survived. Nuwa repaired the sky and turned into the earth. Shenong's body died of old age as his spirit turned into the reincarnation cycle. Kunlun gave the blood of his heart to seal the 4 pillars, and then finally gave up his divine form and sent his primordial spirit to keep watch over the Great Hotu seal. I think I get it now. Massive amount of expositions for that one. Jalan Lan had been constantly busy before and after the new year and hadn't had time for a haircut. His hair had gotten a little long, almost covering his ears. The mountain breeze blew the messy hair on his forehead over his nose bridge. Shen Wei bent down and brushed his hair back. Quietly, he asked, "What do you get?" "You were so young then. Since I was watching over the Great Seal, there's no way I would have let you run off. Why did I give you Kunlun's divine tendon?" Jalan Lan grabbed Shen Wei's wrist and looked up. "It was because Shenong wanted to kill you, right? I wanted to save you, and that was all I could do. I was hoping that if one day I was gone, I could pass the power of 10,000 mountains on to you. This time you guessed wrong. He didn't want to kill me. He wanted to obliterate all the Gui." Shenong couldn't believe that soulless beings could possibly exist in the world. Without a soul, how could one be considered alive? But since he was the one responsible for the Gui's existence, he couldn't escape the blame. He wanted to fix his mistake. Shen Wei began to tremble. "If you hadn't given me your tendon, you wouldn't have left me so soon." Jalan Lan chuckled. "It would have happened sooner or later. If I had a little more time, maybe... The little beauty has grown up into a great beauty. What can you possibly do, even now?" Shen Wei was speechless for a moment. "Then what happened?" Jalan Lan asked. "Then I confined your primordial spirit and went down to the reincarnation cycle to plead with my enemy, Shenong," Shen Wei said. "He was the only one I ever begged for anything. At that point, the reincarnation cycle already had its own order, and the netherworld had just been established with its own set of rules. I begged him to let you into the reincarnation cycle like a mortal. That way, even though you would never remember me, you would still exist. But he wouldn't do it. He said primordial gods could not enter the cycle because it was his own primordial spirit that was supporting it. It could accept all sorts of souls, humans, Yao, gods, demons, but it would not be able to hold the true mountain god, unless he sealed all your divine powers himself and washed your souls completely clean, turning you into a mortal. If he did that, Shenong's own primordial spirit would fade away too, like exchanging one life for another, his life for yours. What did you agree to that made him do that?" "I swore to protect the Great Hotu seal forever. As long as I existed, the seal would exist too. If the seal broke, then I would meet my death along with the rest of the Gui." Shen Wei's fingers were ice cold. "And for all eternity, I could never see you again. If I couldn't help myself, then I would drain your life force and you would die, your souls shattering into a million pieces." Yeah. Uh-huh. We only knew part of that. But still. Shen Wei suddenly shook off Jalan Lan's hand, reaching up to caress his face. Then he grabbed Jalan Lan's chin, forcing him to look up. Pausing after each word, he said, "I kept this promise for thousands of years. Now that the Great Seal is almost broken, I'm at the end of my road. I originally wanted to come and go quietly, but because of a simple coincidence, because of you, it was all for naught. From that night when you truly belonged to me, no, from the day when you told me for the second time that you wanted to give your heart to me, I could never let you go again. The greed in my heart is bottomless. My inner demons drove my actions. I deliberately placed fake memories in the great divine tree to mislead you. I let you see me extracting my own heart's blood for you. I left you so that you would come down to the Huangquan River to find me, then led you to see the edited version of memories in the Great Hotu Seal. And all of it to make you feel too much guilt to ever leave me, to make you joyfully and wholeheartedly choose to die with me. Never mind the fact that he would have done that anyway. Listen. Head full. No thoughts, head full. Shen Wei's hands grew colder and colder. The higher his emotions spiked, the tighter his fingers became. His grip on Zhao Yunlan's chin was painful. Even now, even after you have seen through every lie, I'm still forcing you. Shen Wei's voice was very, very low. Will you choose to die with me and return to chaos for all eternity? Or would you rather I strip away your memories of this life, so that you would never know or remember me, leaving not a single thread of connection between us? Gee, I wonder. Since Zhao Yunlan was unwilling to be deceived, these two paths were finally laid out clearly before him. You're not allowed to think it over, Shen Wei said. You must answer me now. Gazing into Shen Wei's eyes, Zhao Yunlan took hold of Shen Wei's wrist. Abruptly, he asked, How long will the Great Seal hold out? Will there be enough time for me to live out my tiny mortal life? Will I be able to care for my parents in their old age and send them off? Shen Wei didn't seem to comprehend. His face and lips were as pale as snow. The only hint of blood anywhere in his features seemed to be in the veins of his eyes. After a long time, his entire body swayed. As though waking from a dream, he grabbed Zhao Yunlan's shoulder. What? What did you say? Explain yourself. What do you mean? Zhao Yunlan reached out and gently stroked Shen Wei's hair. Such a heavy heart, full of such heavy calculations, he sighed. You sure are hard to take care of. Come on, we're going home. Wide-eyed, Shen Wei could only stare at him. Then he flung himself at Zhao Yunlan, pulling him close. The world spun around him, and Zhao Yunlan had the feeling of familiar ground beneath his feet. There was a sharp sound, as though someone had landed wrong and accidentally knocked over one of the little teacups on the coffee table by the bed, splashing its remaining bits of water on the floor. But no one cared. Shen Wei roughly pressed Zhao Yunlan down on the bed, tearing at his clothes almost violently. Hey, wait, Zhao Yunlan grabbed Shen Wei's hand. I'm not drinking your blood. It's no worse than a mosquito bite to me. That's all well and good for you, but it's nowhere near the same to me. Zhao Yunlan pushed him off and tried to feel for the bedside light, but his arms were almost immediately pinned. Shen Wei's tongue flicked over his Adam's apple, and Zhao Yunlan panted quietly, unable to hold it in. Stop messing around. Even if I dug out my entire heart, I won't die at once. I'd still survive longer than the Great Seal. Shen Wei's voice was terribly low. The scorching heat of his breath caressed Zhao Yunlan's collarbones with each word. I did consider it at the time. Would it be more effective to cut out my heart for you? But I was afraid you'd be too badly frightened, so I only let you see my blood being drawn. After a silence, Zhao Yunlan said dryly, Thanks so much for remembering that I'm a scaredy cat. Shen Wei leaned in closer, kissing the corner of Zhao Yunlan's lips. His tall, straight nose rubbed against Zhao Yunlan's face, and their fingers tangled together as he pressed their half-naked bodies closer. None of that matters. Yunlan, with only a few decades left, let's spend our lives together like mortals, all right? In the final darkness before dawn, their eyes met. As if bewitched by Zhao Yunlan's gaze, Shen Wei dropped a tender kiss on his lips, gentle and lingering. After coming back to himself, Zhao Lan reciprocated with even more enthusiasm. He reached under Shen Wei's clothes and slid his hands around Shen Wei's waist. Spending our lives together is a nice thought, but I need to lay down some rules for my husband. He tightened his grip on Shen Wei's waist, moving to push him to the side and flip them over, and nothing happened. It was as if Shen Wei weighed thousands of kilograms, but Zhao Lan distinctly remembered picking him up before. Shen Wei definitely weighed the same as a normal human. Zhao Lan was perfectly capable of lifting him with his own two hands. Didn't you just say you wanted to live like mortals? Do you really need to bully a mortal like this? That's the end of the chapter. Let me do a page check real quick. I can't with these two absolute frickin' fools. The next chapter is like 12 pages, and we'd go over. How many pages did we read today? Wait, we're on page 175 for chapter 14. I'm just doing some math on the fly to see if we can stop here, if we need to like end somewhere in the middle of a chapter, which I kind of want to avoid, unless there's a scene break. Hang on. Ow, dagnabbit. No scene break. Okay, hang on. We started at 111. We're on 174. 65 pages was about the amount. All right, so we're going to go ahead and make it a clean stop for today and stop on page 175 at chapter 14. I can't even quantify the unfathomable, gay, ridiculous, eternal, yet mortal bullshit that was just shoved right in front of my face. They're gonna do it. They're gonna have one mortal life together, which makes them deeply relatable because they're essentially just having one mortal life together, kind of like everybody else, with the exception of Shen Wei's experience, because Zhao Lan doesn't remember shit. So as far as he's concerned, he was just born, and then all of a sudden, you know, BT dubs, you're immortal, your husband's immortal. But you can both die with the, you know what? There's a lot of information thrown at me just now. At the core of it being gayness. So of course, I appreciate it. But goddamn, you gotta reorder the cosmos just to... I am done with these fools for today. Good Lord. We normally stream Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3 to 5. However, this week is a special week. So we are here today, and we are here every single day of the rest of the week. Monday through Friday streams, baby. From 3 to around 5:30, maybe in this case a little bit earlier than 5:30, but still. So that we can finish Guardian before the holiday. I hope you had a good time. I have to, like, shrink my brain back down to regular mundane thinking after all of the creation myth and versions of creation myths and lies and edited versions and all of that has galaxy brained me. I need to rein it in. So that's what I'm gonna go do. I'm gonna go grab some coffee and think about the cosmos for a little while until I'm back to normal. The gay cosmos, mind you. We are here tomorrow at the same time, in the same place. I hope you had a lovely time. I, of course, had a lovely time, as always. I'm kind of jazzed about having a stream every day this week. So, I will see you tomorrow for more of this sheer and utter madness. And, have a lovely rest of your day. Have a lovely day tomorrow. And I will see you right back here. Alrighty?